The classroom smelled of hot metal and ozone, a scent that had become as familiar as the recycled air of the Galactic Federation's orbital educational platform. On the viewing screen, the vast, swirling nebula that served as their backdrop was momentarily forgotten. All eyes were on the central workbenches, where the final project for xenocultural artifacts and primitive metallurgy was underway. Instructor Velix, a cephalopod-like being from the aquatic world of Thalassa, he drifted between the stations, his tentacles undulating with quiet satisfaction. The assignment was simple, a rite of passage for young diplomats and xenologists: forge a blade. It was a foundational technology, a universal constant across 1,000 worlds. A student's blade would be judged on its composition, its edge, and its adherence to the aesthetic and functional principles of a chosen culture. Around him, the galaxy's youth toiled. A Cathar, with its 4 powerful arms, then hammered a glowing bar of tungsten carbide with precise, thunderous strikes, shaping a blade modeled after the ritual swords of its homeworld's gladiatorial pits. A frill-backed Draxian carefully etched a bioacid reservoir into the spine of a curved, obsidian-like ceramic dagger, a weapon of stealth and poison. A serene, crystalline being from the Cygnus Veil slowly grew a blade from its own silicon-based matrix, a weapon that was also a part of itself. Then there was the human girl. Her name was Ava. She was small, unassuming, with none of the intimidating physical presence of the Cathar or the other warrior species students. Her station was the quietest of all. While others worked bellows and struck sparks from anvils, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, her focus entirely on a single unremarkable object: a long, thick bone. It was the femur of a large, 6-legged herbivore, sourced from the station's food replicator's organic waste system. A ripple of confusion passed through the class. The Draxian paused his etching, his forked tongue flicking out in disdain. What is the human doing? The assignment is to forge a blade, to shape metal. Does she not understand the parameters? The Cathar, whose name was Grurm, stopped his hammering, his massive brow furrowing. Perhaps her species' cognitive limitations are more severe than the admission report suggested. He grunted, a sound like rocks grinding together, and returned to his work, dismissing her as irrelevant. Eva ignored them. In her hands, she held a simple chipped piece of flint she'd also salvaged. With a patience that seemed aged far beyond her years, she began to scrape the bone. Not randomly, but with deliberate, practiced strokes. She wasn't just sharpening it, she was revealing something. She worked the ridge of the bone, following its natural grain, creating a long, wicked curve. She scraped and scored the other end, shaping it into a handle that fit the palm of her hand as if it had grown there. Velix, drawn by the absence of noise, drifted over. His large, liquid eyes studied her work. "Student Eva," he began, his voice a gentle gurgle. "The assignment parameters specify a forged blade. This is scavenged, a found object, modified. While an interesting exercise in adaptation, it does not meet the requirements." Eva looked up. Her eyes, the color of the Earth's sky he had seen in her files, met his. And they were calm but held a deep, quiet intensity. "Instructor Velix," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You said to forge a blade. You defined forging as the process of shaping metal using heat and hammer. But the assignment's intent, as you explained on the first day, was to create a tool of the edge, born of necessity and purpose, reflecting the soul of its maker." Velix's tentacles twitched. He had said that, a flowery preamble he used for every class, yet no student had ever quoted it back to him. "I am not from a world of forges, instructor," Eva continued, her gaze dropping back to the bone. "Not everyone on my planet has access to a smithy, but everyone, everywhere, has always had access to what is left behind. The bones of the hunted, the stones from the riverbed. A blade isn't about the fire you use or the metal you bend. It's about the edge, the purpose, the will to make it sharp. She held up the bone. The flint had done its work. The femur was no longer a leftover piece of protein. It was a knife. A wicked, serrated edge ran along one side, gleaming dully in the artificial light. The handle was smoothly worn, textured with faint cross-hatched grooves she had carved for grip. It was crude, it was primitive, and it was absolutely terrifyingly functional. Gurm had stopped working again, drawn by the conversation. He let out a booming laugh that echoed in the metal room. A bone? You bring a bone to a blade forging? What purpose could that possibly serve, Soft Skin? To tickle a foe to death? A few of the other students, the Draxian included, joined in the laughter. It was a cruel, condescending sound. Ava stood up, holding the bone knife loosely at her side. She didn't look angry, just tired. You see a bone, Gurm. I see a spear point for a child who has no metal. I see a fishhook for a hunter stranded on an ice floe. I see a way to cut sinew for a shelter when your ship crashes and your fancy alloys are just so much scrap. She walked over to a material testing station, a sleek piece of technology that could analyze the molecular structure and durability of any object. She placed the bone knife on the scanner. A holographic readout appeared, listing its properties: tensile strength, edge geometry, mass distribution. The class fell silent. The numbers, while not as high as the Cathar's tungsten carbide, they were impressive for an organic material. The edge geometry was nearly perfect, optimized for slicing through fibrous tissue. But Ava wasn't done. She picked up the knife and walked to a different station, a live fire simulation chamber. It was a small, sterile room where a holographic predator could be projected for tactical training. She stepped inside. Ava, what are you doing? Velix asked, a note of alarm in his gurgle. The simulations are calibrated for armed military personnel. She just looked at him. You wanted to see its purpose. The door hissed shut. On the observation screen, the simulation activated. A terrifying, six-legged, fanged creature materialized, charging directly at her. The class watched, some with morbid curiosity, others with genuine fear for the foolish human. Ava didn't panic. She didn't run. As the beast lunged, she moved. It was a single fluid motion. She dropped low, using her smaller stature to get under the sweeping claws, and drove the bone knife upwards with both hands, using the creature's own momentum against it. The sharpened bone, reinforced by its natural structure, found the soft juncture where the holographic neck met the holographic shoulder. The simulation flickered and died. The chamber door opened. Ava stepped out, the bone knife still in her hand, not a scratch on her. There was no blood, of course. There didn't need to be. The message was as clear as the edge on her blade. She looked at Gurm, her gaze steady. You asked what purpose a bone could serve? The same purpose as your forged steel, your Draxian poison, or your Cygnus crystal. To give the one who holds it a few more seconds of life than the one who doesn't. She placed the knife gently on her workbench. On my world, we learned that lesson a long time ago. Fire and hammer are a luxury. The will to survive, that's the real forge. The laughter was gone. In its place was a profound, uncomfortable silence. The Cathar stared at his magnificent blade, then at the simple piece of bone on Ava's table. He saw, perhaps for the first time, not a primitive object, but the unyielding spirit that had shaped it. The other students looked away, their own creations feeling suddenly like hollow exercises in aesthetics. Velix simply stared at the readout from the simulation, his mind reeling. The human girl hadn't just made a blade, she had forged a testament to the most primal, powerful force in the universe, the refusal to die. For the rest of the class, a strange tension hung in the air. The rhythmic clang of Grurm's hammer was less confident. The Draxians' etching became sloppy. They kept glancing at the bone knife lying on the bench, a silent rebuke to their technocratic pride. They had all tried to create a weapon. The human had created an extension of herself, and the class was nearing its end. Students put the final touches on their projects, polishing hilts, sharpening edges, preparing for the final critique. Instructor Velix, hoping to restore some normalcy, announced that they would begin the presentations. "We shall start with..." His gaze swept the room, unconsciously skipping over Eva. "Student Grurm." The Cathar stood, his forearms holding his tungsten carbide blade with pride. It was a masterpiece of smithing, perfectly balanced, the edge a mirror-bright line of molecular sharpness. The hilt was wrapped in the treated hide of a beast he had slain in his rite of passage. He held it up, and the lights glinted off its surface with a cold, sterile perfection. "This is the blade of Krak," he boomed, his voice filling the room. "It follows the traditions of my people's greatest warriors. Forged in the heart of a dying star, cooled in the blood of 1,000 foes, it can cut through any known armor. It is a weapon worthy of a Cathar." The other students murmured in appreciation. It was, by any technical standard, flawless. Velix nodded, his tentacles tracing the air near the blade, sensing its perfect molecular density. "Exemplary work, Grurm. The forging is exceptional, and the cultural adherence is precise." Next was the Draxian. His ceramic dagger, with its shimmering venomous spine, was a thing of sinister beauty. He explained the complex process of bonding the acid reservoir to the blade without compromising its structure, a feat of biological and metallurgical engineering. The crystalline being presented its self-grown blade, a shimmering, fractal-edged shard that sang with a faint harmonic vibration as it moved through the air. One by one, they presented their work. Each blade was a marvel of their respective worlds' technology and artistry. They were perfect, and they were all, and in a way that none of them could quite articulate, soulless. Finally, Velix turned to Eva. He hesitated, but the protocol was clear. "Student Eva, please present your project." Eva stood holding the bone knife. It looked so small, so insignificant in the palm of her hand. It had no mirror finish. It hummed with no harmonic vibration. It was just a piece of a dead animal, sharpened with a rock. "I have no name for it," she said quietly. "It's just a knife, a tool." Grurm scoffed, but it was a half-hearted sound. "A tool? For what? Cutting your food?" Eva looked at him, a faint, almost sad smile on her lips. "Yes, and for cutting other things. It's all the same, really." She turned to the class. "You all come from worlds of plenty, worlds with forges and factories and starships. You've never known what it's like to have nothing, to be cold and hungry and hunted. On my planet, for most of our history, that was the default state. And in that state, you learn that everything is a resource. Everything can be a tool, everything can be a weapon, because the line between them is just a matter of intent." She held the knife up, turning it slowly. This bone came from the food replicator. Waste. Garbage. But the structure was there, waiting. The strength. The shape. I just asked it to be something else. I listened to it, and I helped it become what it was always meant to be. A blade. She walked over to a piece of scrap metal left over from another student's project, a thick plate of high-grade steel. Without a word, she raised the bone knife and brought it down in a swift, sharp arc. There was a dull thwack. The bone knife stuck, its point embedded a full quarter-inch into the solid steel. A collective gasp went through the room. Grurm's jaw, all three parts of it, went slack. The bone hadn't shattered. It hadn't even chipped. It had pierced military-grade steel. Ideva worked the knife loose and held it up again. It's not about being stronger than the steel. It's about being sharper, more focused. It's about concentrating all your force into a single tiny point. She looked at Gurm. Your blade is made to withstand 1,000 blows. Mine is made to deliver one, perfectly. It doesn't need to last forever. It just needs to last long enough. The silence in the room was absolute. Velix slowly drifted forward, his tentacles reaching out, not to touch, but to gently probe the air around the knife. The data from his internal sensors was staggering. The bone, a simple biomatter, had been transformed. The scraping hadn't just shaped it. It had work-hardened the surface, aligning the crystalline structure of the calcium to a degree that rivaled synthetic composites. He looked from the knife to the pierced steel plate, and finally to Eva. In her calm, human eyes, he saw no pride, no arrogance. He saw only a quiet, unshakable certainty. They say it was the look of a species that had learned through countless millennia of hardship that the only true failure was ceasing to try. They had stared into the void, and finding nothing there to help them, had simply rolled up their sleeves and gotten to work with whatever they had on hand. Bones, stones, fire, will. He turned to the rest of the class, his voice losing its usual pedagogical drone, becoming something softer, more genuine. You have all created fine examples of your world's craft. They are objects of beauty, tradition, and advanced engineering. He gestured towards Eva's simple bone knife. But this is not an object. This is an answer. It is the answer a species gives to a universe that tells it is weak and soft and doomed. It is the shape of defiance. It is the geometry of survival. The class was over, but no one moved. They just stared at the human girl and the piece of sharpened bone in her hand. And for the first time, they truly understood what it meant to be from a place called Earth. It wasn't a planet of mighty forges or advanced metallurgy. It was a planet of survivors. And survivors, as they had just learned, could make a blade out of anything. Even their own bones, if they had to. In the weeks that followed, the incident became a quiet legend on the orbital platform. Students from other disciplines heard the story of the human girl and the bone knife. See, instructors used it as an example in xenopsychology classes, discussing the concept of resourcefulness under existential pressure. Gurm, the mighty Cathar warrior, requested a formal meeting with Eva. He came not with arrogance, but with a deep and genuine curiosity. "Human Eva," he rumbled, his forearms clasped nervously behind his back. "I have replayed the simulation in my mind 1,000 times. Your technique, it was not a warrior's stance. It was not an attack. It was something else. Explain it to me." Eva, who was reading a text on Thalasan poetry in the common area, looked up. She smiled, not the sad smile from before, but a warm one. "It was a butcher's stroke, Gurm. You aim for the joints, the connective tissue. It's efficient. It's not about glory. It's about dinner." Gurm was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "You compared killing a simulated apex predator to preparing a meal?" "On my world, the line is often very thin," Eva replied. "My grandmother grew up on a farm. She could kill a chicken, pluck it, and have it in the pot in under an hour. She also raised 7 children, nursed a sick neighbor through the winter, and could quote Shakespeare from memory. Survival isn't one thing. It's everything. It's the butcher and the poet living in the same skin." This concept of such profound duality was almost impossible for Gurm to grasp. His culture was built on specialization, the warrior, the artisan, the thinker. They were separate castes. The idea that one being could contain all of that, and that this internal conflict was a source of strength, not weakness, was revolutionary. Meanwhile, the Draxian, whose name was S-Heck, found his own cultural axioms challenged. He approached Eva a few days later, his frills lying flat against his neck in a gesture of submission, a shocking act for his proud species. "A human Eva," he hissed softly. "My blade, with its venom. It is a weapon of deceit. It strikes from the shadows. Your culture, it seems. So direct. So honest. I do not understand how you could respect such a thing." Eva thought for a moment. Honesty? I don't know if that's the word. It's more like practicality. The bone knife doesn't hide what it is. It knows it's a piece of a dead thing. It knows it's temporary. It's honest about its own desperation. That desperation, that honesty, that's where its power comes from. It has nothing to lose. She looked at Sehek's venomous dagger. Your blade hides its deadliness. It relies on surprise. They're just different strategies for the same goal, to be the one still standing when the fight is over. The final critique day arrived. Instructor Velix stood before the class, a data slate in one tentacle. The grades have been computed based on the initial parameters, composition, technique, and cultural adherence. By those metrics, Student Grrm receives the highest marks for his exemplary forged blade. He paused. However, the word hung in the air. The purpose of this academy is not merely to teach you to replicate your own cultures, but to understand others, to prepare you for a galaxy of countless perspectives. And so, I am establishing a new annual award, the Bone Blade Citation. It will be given to the student who best embodies the core principle of survival technology, the ability to create a solution from available means under any circumstances. He turned to Eva. The first recipient is student Eva, for her project which redefined the very parameters of the assignment. He didn't hand her a medal or a plaque. Instead, he presented her with a small, transparent case. Inside, mounted on a velvet cushion, was a simple, ancient flint scraper, identical to the one she had used. "This is from my people's own prehistory," Velix explained softly. "Before the oceans of Thalassa gave rise to our cities, we too used such tools to build our shelters from coral and shell. You reminded us that we all share a common primal ancestry, the ancestry of the maker, the survivor." Eva took the case, her eyes wide. For the first time, her calm demeanor broke, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was a tear of recognition. Across the gulf of space and time, another species acknowledged her own's long, hard journey. They understood. Grrm, to everyone's shock, stepped forward. He held his magnificent, priceless tungsten carbide blade in two of his hands. With a swift, powerful motion, he snapped it in half over his knee. The sharp crack echoed in the silent room. "A blade that cannot learn is just a shard of metal," he rumbled, his voice thick with emotion. He held the two broken pieces out to Eva. "Io, will you teach me to make one from bone?" Eva looked at the broken blade, then at the massive, four-armed alien. She saw not a student or a competitor, but a fellow traveler on a long and difficult road. She gently took one of the broken pieces. "We'll start with a smaller bone," she said, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "And you have to promise to be patient. It's not about strength. It's about listening." And so, in a classroom on a space station floating in a nebula, the Cathar warrior sat cross-legged on the floor next to the human girl. He held a simple leg bone from a replicated herbivore, and with a piece of flint she had found for him, he made his first clumsy, scraping stroke. It was the beginning of a new kind of forging. Not of metal, but of understanding. And the blade they would eventually create together would be sharper than anything either of them could have made alone. It was a blade forged not in fire, but in the quiet, enduring heat of a shared will to survive.